Montana Territory, June 1883. The dust had barely settled when the stagecoach door creaked open and Tessa Granville stepped down into the sun-baked main street of Dry River. The town was smaller than she imagined. One crooked saloon, a lopsided mercantile, and a church with a bell that looked like it had not rung in years. Her boots hit the dirt with a dull thud, and she tugged her shawl tighter over her shoulders, even though the heat pressed like a hand against her back. A man tipped his hat as he passed, but his glance snagged on the edge of her face on the faint, puckered scar that curved from just below her left ear to the edge of her jaw. She turned away before he could ask about it. They always asked, eventually, or worse, they stared and said nothing. She clutched the letter in her hand, the one that had brought her here. A kind, tidy scrawl from a widower rancher named Ellis McCall, looking for a woman to help raise his 2 young children and keep house on his spread north of town. He seemed decent enough in his letters. But he had not come to meet her. Instead, a man stood leaning against the post of the station, boots dusty, sleeves rolled, hat shadowing his face. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of quiet stillness about him that made her uneasy, like he saw more than he let on. "You Tessa Granville?" he asked. She nodded, wary. "I am." He stepped forward, offering his hand. "Name's Silas Langford. I work the McCall Ranch. Ellis sent me to bring you up there." She shook his hand, surprised at how gentle his grip was. "Is he all right?" "He is. Just caught up trying to fix a busted fence. Happens when the rains come late." She nodded, lifting her carpetbag. "Lead the way." They rode in silence most of the way. The wagon groaned under them as they rolled past open fields, hills dotted with cottonwoods, and the slow twist of the river that gave the town its name. Tessa kept her face turned toward the wind, letting her hair hide the scar, but Silas noticed. She could feel it. Not in the way some men stared, but in how he did not. How he let his gaze settle just long enough to see her and then gave her back her space. When they reached the ranch, 2 children came tearing down the porch steps. A girl, maybe 6, and a boy not much older. "Kip, Kaylee, slow down," Silas called out. The boy skidded to a stop, grinning. "Is this her?" Tessa smiled, heart aching. "Hello." Ellis McCall stepped out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He was older than she expected, maybe mid-40s, with kind eyes but a tired bend to his shoulders. "Miss Granville," he said. "Glad you made it," she nodded. "Thank you for sending Silas." Ellis gave a thin smile. "I hope the place suits you all right. The kids could use a woman's hand around here." That night, Tessa settled into the spare room with a view of the barn and hills beyond. The children were sweet, if a little wild. Ellis was polite but distant, and Silas he kept close enough to help, but always just far enough not to intrude. She found herself watching him from the kitchen window as he moved through his work steady, capable, quiet. One afternoon, she brought him a glass of water out by the fence line where he was mending a post. "You do not say much," she said as he took the glass. "I say enough," he replied, then glanced at her. "You do not much like people looking at you, do you?" Her throat tightened. He did not look away. "You do not have to tell me. I just figure, whatever happened, it is not what matters most." She swallowed hard. "You do not know anything about me. You are here," he said simply. "That tells me plenty." She turned away before her eyes could betray her. It had been so long since anyone saw past it, weeks past. She taught Kip to read, helped Kaylee sew her first crooked stitches. The nights were quiet, the air scented with sage and dust. And Silas was always there in the barn, by the corral, near enough to count on. She found herself waiting for the sound of his boots on the porch, his voice when he said good morning, the way his eyes softened when Kaylee clung to his leg. Then came the letter. Ellis unfolded it at the breakfast table. "My sister in Helena is ill, needs me there for a spell." "You will take the children?" Tessa asked. He shook his head. "No, I will be gone near a month. They know you now." "And Silas will be here." She tried to keep her voice steady. "Of course." The first night without Ellis, it stormed. Thunder cracked over the hills, and Kaylee crawled into Tessa's bed, trembling. "Do not like the loud," she whispered. "Mama used to sing to me." Tessa pulled her close. What did she sing? Just hums, like this. She hummed soft and low. Tessa closed her eyes, holding the girl tight. Later, by the low light of the lantern, Tessa found Silas out by the barn, checking the roof for leaks. You do not have to do everything alone, you know, she said, stepping close. He looked down at her, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Neither do you. They stood in the hush between raindrops. I was not always like this, she said quietly. Before the fire, I had a fiancé in St. Louis. He could not even look at me after. Silas's jaw tightened. Then he was not worth you. She looked up, blinking. You really believe that? I have seen how you are with those kids, with this place, with me. Her breath caught. He stepped closer. You do not need to hide anymore, Tessa. She reached up slowly, drawing the shawl from her face. Silas did not look away. He touched her cheek, fingers rough and warm. Still the most beautiful thing I have seen in a long while, he said. Tessa's heart broke open and mended all at once. She leaned into his hand. You really see me, do you? I do. And for the first time in years, she believed it. The days settled into a rhythm after Ellis left. Tessa rose before the light touched the ridgeline, tied her apron without a word, and moved through the morning with quiet steadiness. Kaylee liked to trail behind her, clutching a doll stitched from old flannel. Kip had taken to shadowing Silas out to the barn, asking questions he barely waited to hear answered. In the hush between chores, when the children were occupied or napping, Tessa found places to be still. She mended shirts with frayed cuffs, took the time to scrub the windows with vinegar and cloth, and once sat alone on the back steps with a basket of peas, shelling them as magpies croaked from the fence posts. The peace wasn't loud. It worked its way into her the way warmth seeps into hands chilled by creek water, slow and quiet. One afternoon, after she'd finished sweeping dust from the corners of the porch, she found Silas oiling the hinges of the tack room door. He didn't speak at first, but his glance lingered when she handed him a clean rag. You always keep your hands busy, he said, wiping the oil from his fingers. That's the only way I know to keep my thoughts from getting too loud. He nodded once, then leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. I used to shoe horses for a cavalry outfit down near Fort Shaw. They didn't care much if you were quiet so long as your work held. She sat on the edge of the porch, arms resting on her knees. Why'd you leave? They started asking for more than I was willing to give. I didn't sign up to shoot at folks who never asked for us to be here. Her eyes lifted. You mean the tribes? Mostly Blackfeet out that way, he said. The officers wanted us to drive them off their winter grounds. I left before it came to that. He paused, then added, my father called it cowardice. I call it holding to what's right. She didn't answer right away, just watched a pair of crows circling above the tree line. My father never forgave me for surviving the fire. He said I must have done something terrible to be spared when my sisters weren't. Silas didn't shift, didn't speak over her, he just waited. I used to think maybe he was right, she said. That I was some kind of punishment walking around. He crossed the short distance between them and sat on the step below hers. You don't owe your guilt to anyone. She looked at his profile in the slanting gold of the afternoon jaw set, eyes calm. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Just starting over somewhere no one knows your name. I did once. Got as far as Missoula before I turned around, realized I'd rather be useful than invisible. Tessa let the silence stretch between them, not uncomfortable, just full with things both said and unsaid. A wind moved through the grass and Kaylee's laughter rang from the side yard, where Kip was showing her how to skip stones in the horse trough. They think the world of you, she said softly. I try not to disappoint them. You don't, she replied. You haven't disappointed me either. He looked up at her then, and something in his expression changed, not surprise, not disbelief, but the quiet knowledge of someone who'd waited a long time to be seen. That night, she found a folded scrap of paper tucked beneath the edge of her sewing basket. It wasn't a letter, just a rough pencil sketch of Kip and Kaylee sitting under the cottonwood near the creek. The lines were simple but sure. Someone had drawn it from memory. She found Silas in the lean-to, brushing down the mare. I didn't know you could draw, He didn't turn. I don't show it much. Why not? It's not something a man gets praised for out here. She stepped into the stall close enough to smell the warm hide of the horse and the faint dust on his shirt. You should show more. His hand paused on the brush. Maybe I will. The next morning, she found another sketch, this one of the kitchen table, with Kaylee's doll propped on one corner and Kip's slingshot resting beside it. She tucked it inside her journal. Later, out by the clothesline, Silas handed her a spool of twine without asking what she needed it for. You always know what I'm reaching for, she said. I watch when it matters. She looked up at him, the sun casting his face in sharp, honest angles. You think Ellis will come back any different? She asked. Can't say, Silas replied, but I think some things are starting to settle in ways none of us expected. I didn't come here looking for this, she whispered. I know, he said. Neither did I. She tied the end of the twine to the last post, the wind tugging at the damp sheets behind her. Then she reached for his hand, not sudden, not shy, just steady. He didn't pull away. By the third week of Ellis's absence, the routines folded into something more than habit. It wasn't just the way Tessa handed off a pail before Silas reached for it, or how he cut kindling to the length he'd seen her favor. It was in the pauses, the unspoken giving of space and the quiet ways they stepped into each other's silences. Kip caught a fever that week. Not high enough to panic, but enough to keep him in bed for 2 days, cheeks flushed and eyes glassy. Tessa sat with him through most of the first night, wiping his brow and coaxing cool water between his lips. At dawn, she found Silas standing just outside the door with a basin of clean cloths and a tin of willow bark tea. I boiled it long, he said. Won't taste good. He won't care, she replied, taking it from him. He didn't come inside. Just waited until she glanced back over her shoulder and said, You can sit. Silas dropped into the chair near the window, setting his hat in his lap. Tessa looked down at the boy, his breathing steadier now. You've never said if you had family. I did. 2 sisters. Both married off before I left Kansas. He leaned back, eyes on the far wall. My mother passed the winter I turned 17. Father remarried before the ground thawed. She didn't ask more. Just let the quiet carry the weight of it. Kaylee crept into the room mid-morning, her doll pressed to her chest. Is Kip gonna die? No, Tessa said, drawing her close. He's just hot and tired, like when you've been chasing chickens too long. Kaylee frowned, thinking it over. Chickens don't get fevers. They do, Silas said. They just don't tell you. That made her laugh, and the sound lightened the room. By the next night, Kip's fever broke. He was back on his feet the day after, leaner and quieter, but smiling when Tessa handed him a slice of bread with molasses. That evening, once the children were settled and the last of the dishes dried, Tessa stepped outside. The wind had shifted, cooler now, with the scent of pine rising from the north. She walked past the corral, down the slope toward the creek, where she found Silas sitting on a flat rock, a folded scrap of paper in his hands. She didn't speak until she was beside him. I didn't know you were still drawing. I don't always mean to, he said, not looking up. But it comes when I'm thinking. She reached for the paper. He handed it over without hesitation. It was her. Not posed or polished, just her standing at the fence, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back, watching the horizon with her hands resting on the rail. The lines were rough, but the likeness was unmistakable. You made me look brave, she said. He turned toward her. I just drew what I see. She folded the paper gently and tucked it into her skirt pocket. I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop, she said after a moment. For you to decide I'm too much trouble. I don't scare easy, he said, and I don't walk off from things that matter. They didn't touch. Not yet. But the space between them felt different now, less like a distance, more like a thread drawn taut. Back at the house, Kaylee stood on the porch, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I had a bad dream, she said. Tessa crouched down, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's cheek. You're safe now. You want to lie close to me tonight? Kaylee nodded, reaching for her hand. As they turned toward the door, Silas said quietly, I'll check the barn once more, then I'm headed to bed. She looked back at him. Good night, he held her gaze. Night, Tessa. That was the first time he'd said her name like that, not as a formality, not as a courtesy. Just softly, like it belonged to him now, too. The next morning she found a small carving on the kitchen windowsill. A bird, wings outstretched, no bigger than her palm. She didn't ask if it was his. She didn't need to. Instead, she left a spool of green thread by the barn door and a half loaf of sweet cornbread wrapped in cloth. They weren't gifts. They were answers. That afternoon, when the sun was high and the air stood hot and still, she caught him watching her from the shade of the cottonwood. Not with hunger, not with pity, just the kind of gaze that made her feel known from the inside out. He said nothing. But when she passed him later with Kaylee on her hip, he reached out just briefly and let his hand brush hers. She didn't pull away. Tessa woke to the sound of a wagon on the road. The creak of wood and the rhythm of hooves rose soft through the morning stillness. She set aside the mending and stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the sun already climbing above the hills. It was Ellis returning. He pulled up slow, one hand raised in greeting. His beard had grown in patchy and he looked thinner than when he'd left. Kip came running from the side yard, Kaylee not far behind, both hollering his name. Ellis climbed down stiffly, catching Kaylee in one arm. "You've grown," he said, smiling, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Tessa waited near the door, hands clasped in front of her. Ellis met her gaze, gave a polite nod. "Thank you," he said, "for keeping them steady." "They've been a comfort," she replied. Silas came from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He stopped a few paces off, tipping his hat. Ellis nodded. "Place looks well kept." "Credit goes to all three of them," Silas said, his tone even. Ellis looked toward the house. "I'll need to rest. Journey back took longer than planned." Tessa stepped aside to let him pass. The children trailed after, full of chatter. When the door closed behind them, Silas let out a quiet breath. "He's not himself," Tessa said. "Grief can bend a man," Silas replied. "Sometimes it twists him." She picked up the mending again, but her fingers lingered on the thread longer than they should have. That night, the house felt thick with words that didn't settle right. At supper, Ellis asked after the livestock, the weather, the schoolhouse in town, but his eyes never stayed on any one thing long. He didn't ask about the sketches on the mantel, the ones Kip had lined up in pride, each drawn by Silas. When the children had gone to bed, Ellis stayed at the table, cradling a tin mug of coffee gone cold. "You've done more than I expected," he said without meeting her eyes. "I did what was needed." He glanced out the window. "I thought I'd come back and feel something easy, like picking up where I left off." His jaw worked, but everything's shifted. Silas stood by the hearth, arms folded. "Things had to shift, Ellis." "I see that now." Ellis looked toward Tessa. "You were never meant to be just a helper." "I didn't come here expecting to be anyone's anything," she said, voice steady. Ellis nodded once, then pushed back from the table. "I'll turn in." The door to his room shut behind him with a soft click. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling dry leaves along the porch. Tessa stepped out, wrapping her shawl tighter. Silas followed, not close, but enough that she felt his presence like a steady weight. "He came back to a home, but not the one he remembered," she said. "No one comes back the same," Silas replied. "Not from loss, not from time away." She looked toward the barn, the moon casting long shadows along the fence line. "He's a good man, but I don't belong with him." "I know." She turned to him then. "You've known that for a while." I didn't want to speak what wasn't mine to say. She stepped down from the porch and walked until her boots pressed into the earth beside his. "It's mine now." His hand found hers, fingers rough, the grip sure. "I'm not afraid of what's left behind," she whispered, "but I want to choose what comes next." Silas didn't answer with words. He lifted her hand to his chest, holding it there. She felt the slow, even beat of his heart under her palm. "You've already chosen," he said, and she had. The next morning, Ellis saddled his horse. Tessa waited beside the garden plot, Kaylee helping her pick beans. "I'll be staying with my sister's family for a while," Ellis told her, reins in hand. "Need to figure out what I'm meant to do next." She nodded. "You'll always have a place here if you need one." He looked toward the children, then back at her. They'll do better with you than I ever managed. You gave them roots, she said. We'll help them grow. He climbed into the saddle. Silas is steady. That's more than most can ask for. She watched him ride out, dust rising behind him in a thin line. That evening she found Silas in the pasture, checking the latch on the gate. The sun dipped low behind him, casting his figure in gold. I told Kip and Kaylee, she said. They understand, he turned. What did you tell them? That I'm not leaving, and neither are you. He crossed the space between them. Then we build. Yes, she said, together. He touched her cheek just once, a silent vow in the gesture. Then they walked back to the house, side by side as the last light faded over the hills. Summer deepened into stillness. The cottonwoods along the creek turned darker in the heat, their leaves whispering high above the water's edge. Tessa had begun rising before the rooster's crow, not out of necessity but instinct. There was peace in watching the sky shift from indigo to gold while the house still slept. One morning, while she was gathering eggs, Silas approached with a folded cloth in hand. He waited by the fence, eyes lowered, until she stepped clear of the coop. I made something, he said, offering it to her. She unfolded the cloth carefully. Inside lay a tooled leather notebook, the edges stitched with green thread, the cover pressed with the faint outline of a cottonwood leaf. You carved this, she asked. He nodded once. Figured you'd need somewhere to keep your thoughts. She ran her fingers over the worn edge. I haven't written anything just for myself in years. Maybe now's the time. She glanced up at him. There's still a part of me that doesn't know how to live without waiting for something to tear loose. Silas stepped closer, his voice low. Then we build it strong enough to hold. They didn't speak of Ellis again. The house had shifted but not broken. Kip had taken to calling Silas by name with more ease now, and Kaylee had begun dragging her blanket to the barn when she couldn't sleep, just to sit near where he worked. One afternoon, as Tessa scrubbed the last of the harvest dust from a bucket of carrots, Kip came in with a scrape along his forearm. Fell off the fence, he said, eyes wide but dry. She pressed a clean rag to the scrape and reached for the salve Silas kept by the hearth. You didn't cry. No point, Kip said. I knew it'd be fixed. After he left, Silas came in from the field, dirt still fresh across his sleeves. Tessa handed him a cup of water and leaned against the table. He trusts you like he's always known how. Silas drank, then set the cup down carefully. Sometimes it's easier to be steady for someone else than it is for yourself. She drew close enough to rest her hand over his heart. You don't have to carry that alone. He placed his hand over hers. I won't, not anymore. That night they sat on the porch long after the children had gone to bed. Fireflies danced low over the grass. Tessa had brought out a quilt and Silas sat beside her, boots off, the air between them soft and warm. I used to think I'd never belong anywhere again, she said. You do here. She looked at him then, not searching for reassurance but finding it anyway. I want to stay, not just for the children, not because I have nowhere else. He turned to her, his expression steady. Then stay as mine. She didn't hesitate. I already have. They married beneath the cottonwood tree before the first frost. It wasn't a large gathering, just the children, the preacher from Dry River, and a neighbor woman who brought a pie and a hymn book. Kaylee picked late asters for Tessa's hair, and Kip stood beside Silas with a ribbon tied around his collar. Afterward, they shared stew and bread on the front porch, the children chasing each other through the grass as the sun fell behind the ridge. Later, when the house had quieted, Silas drew her close beside the hearth, his hand at the small of her back. This is what I never thought I'd find, he said. She smiled, her forehead resting against his. It's not something you find. It's something you make. They lived that way, honest and steady. Tessa took over teaching the children their letters by lantern light, while Silas taught Kip to whittle and Kaylee to ride bareback with her arms wide to the wind. The house grew stronger in little ways. Shelves added, a bench carved smooth by years of sitting, lines of laughter worn into the wood around the doorframe. In the spring, a new cradle joined the bedroom, built from pine Silas cut himself and sanded smooth as silk. Tessa stitched the linens by hand, every seam a quiet promise. When their daughter was born the following March, they named her Clara, after a name Tessa had once whispered to the wind and let go. Now, it had a place again. Silas held the baby easily, with the same quiet awe he had first shown her mother. And when Clara reached for his beard with tiny fingers, he only laughed and rocked her closer. The days weren't always easy. Fences broke, winters came hard, and life remained what it had always been: demanding, beautiful, and often quiet. But the weight of it was shared now, and that made all the difference. Tessa wrote again, not for escape, but to remember to keep the shape of this life held safe in ink and paper. She filled the leather notebook slowly, each page a testament to what had grown from sorrow, to what love looked like when it was earned and kept. And on evenings when the wind moved through the grass just so, when the sun dipped low, and the children's laughter rang through the yard, she would glance toward Silas, her husband, her home, and know, in every quiet part of her, that she had found a place no fire could take from her again.